And there is a particular kind of madness that does not look like madness. It looks like confusion. It looks like a person sitting at a kitchen table, staring at the news, thinking, am I the only one who remembers this differently? It looks like someone in a meeting room wondering why the policy changed, but no one will acknowledge that it changed. It looks like a voter watching a politician describe a thing that just happened, describe it directly, in confidence, with a straight face, and say it never happened. And this is not a new experience for human beings. But something about the present moment is different. Something about the scale of it is different. In gaslighting, a word that used to describe what abusive partners do in private, behind closed doors, has become the operating system of American public life. And the reason it works so well at scale is the same reason it works so well in a marriage. It works because the target is reasonable. It works because the target still trusts their own institutions. It works because the target wants to believe the discomfort they feel is their own misunderstanding rather than someone else's deliberate design. And the question is not whether this is happening. The question is, once you see the blueprint, what do you do with it? And the word gaslighting comes from a 1944 film. A husband systematically dims the gas-powered lights in their home, then denies that the lights are changing. His wife, isolated from everyone who might confirm what she sees, begins to believe that she is losing her grip on reality. And that is the mechanism. Deny the observable, isolate the target, create enough doubt that the target's own perception becomes the enemy. In a relationship, one person does this to another. In a country, systems do this to populations. And what this video is going to do is lay out how that scaling works, not theoretically, and specifically. The media environment that makes people doubt their own memory. In the political strategy that treats denial as a power move rather than a defense. Nor language designed to make exploitation feel like partnership. Into the social media architecture that fragments shared reality so thoroughly that agreement on basic facts becomes nearly impossible. And at the end, there is something practical here, because awareness without action is just a more sophisticated form of helplessness. And that, let's start at the beginning. Before the scale of this can be understood, the mechanism itself has to be understood. And because you cannot spot the industrial version of something if you have never studied the handmade one. In 1960, psychologist Leon Festinger published research on cognitive dissonance. In the discomfort a person feels when the information they receive contradicts what they already believe to be true. His central finding was that when confronted with that discomfort, most people do not update their beliefs, deny to find a way to discredit the source of the uncomfortable information. This is not stupidity. And together, this is how human minds conserve energy. Belief revision is metabolically expensive, and dismissal is cheap. A skilled gaslighter exploits this tendency. They do not simply lie. That is too fragile. And they build a competing reality around the lie. They establish themselves as the most trusted source, introduce doubt about every alternative source, and then, when confronted with evidence, they do not retreat, they advance and question the confronter's memory, their stability, their motives, their intelligence. Exhausted by the asymmetry of the conflict, often caves, not because they are weak, because sustained self-trust in the face of constant, confident contradiction requires an almost inhuman amount of psychological energy. And now scale that dynamic to an entire population. It is worth being precise here. It is worth being precise here. Because the media as a phrase has become so loaded that saying it triggers reflexive alignment on both sides before anything substantive has been said. So let's set the politics aside for a moment and talk about what the structural incentives actually produce, regardless of editorial intent. In 2014, Facebook engineer Adam Mosseri, who would later run Instagram, implored to team that analyzed which types of content generated the most engagement on the platform. The internal data was unambiguous. Intent that triggered anger or anxiety drove 3 to 4 times the engagement of content that triggered agreement or mild interest. And the business decision followed the data. Algorithms were tuned to surface what enrages. And the advertising revenue model required time on platform, and the fastest path to time on platform was emotional activation, not information. Emotional activation. The consequence of that single business decision multiplied across billions of users over a decade. Is that the information environment most Americans live inside was designed not to inform, but to destabilize? And here is where the gaslighting enters at scale. When you live inside an information environment that has been architecturally engineered to keep you in a state of low-grade alarm, you become a person who is constantly certain that something is wrong, but cannot quite name it. You are suspicious. You are reactive. You doubt your own assessments because yesterday's certain catastrophe was replaced by today's certain catastrophe before the first one is resolved. That is the condition gaslighters create in their targets deliberately. The algorithm creates it integral as a byproduct of profit motive. But accident does not make the damage less real. And this is the first structural layer of mass gaslighting in America, an information architecture that produces reality disorientation as a feature and not a bug. What happens when political actors, people who have studied persuasion as a professional discipline, and recognize that the population is already in this disoriented state and begin to work with it rather than against it? You get a strategy that has a name among communication researchers. It is called fire hosing. And the term was coined by researchers at the Rand Corporation, Christopher Paul and Miriam Matthews, in a 2016 report, and to describe a propaganda method that does not try to convince. It tries to overwhelm. The strategy works like this, and release so many contradictory claims so quickly that the audience is unable to fact-check any of them before the next wave arrives. And when old claims are refuted, do not defend them. Simply move on. And cornered on a contradiction, do not explain it. Attack the person who noticed it. And crucial insight in the Rand report was this:
Traditional propaganda works by presenting false information as true.
In one of conduct, fire hosing works by destroying the audience's confidence that truth is knowable at all. That shift is fundamental. If a government tells its people, we are winning the war, and they are not winning the war. Propaganda fails the moment soldiers come home with a different story. The lie requires a single coherent alternative to collapse. And if a government tells its people, no one can really know what's happening, it does not matter what the soldiers say when they come home, because the audience has already been trained to distrust any single source, including its own eyes. In the personal gaslighting blueprint, this is the stage where the abuser has successfully been put to target from every independent source of confirmation, not by destroying those sources, but by poisoning the target's relationship to them. In America, over the past 15 years, this has not been the project of a single party or a single administration. It has been a pattern that accelerates whenever political survival requires it. And both ends of the political spectrum have used versions of it. And though the most documented and systematic deployment has come from the right, a tool which has built entire media infrastructure around the premise that mainstream sources are categorically suspect. And the result is not that one side believes true things and one side believes false things. And the result is that tens of millions of people have been methodically detached from shared epistemic ground. They are not stupid, and they have been strategically isolated. There is a difference. And there is a form of institutional gaslighting that receives less attention than media and politics. And perhaps because it is dressed in the language of concern rather than conflict. In 2019, the Business Roundtable, a lobbying group representing the chief executives of nearly 200 of America's largest corporations, released a statement announcing a new purpose for the corporation. No longer would shareholder value be the exclusive priority. Going forward, corporations would serve employees, customers, communities, and the environment. It was received in much of the business press as a historic shift. 3 years later, a study published by researchers at Harvard Law School examined the actual policy behavior of the companies whose CEOs had signed that statement. And the researchers found no statistically significant change in corporate governance. Executive pay continued to accelerate away from median worker pay. Layoffs were executed in ways indistinguishable from pre-statement patterns. Environmental commitments were largely non-binding. The gap between the statement and the behavior is precisely the structure of gaslighting. You are being told what is happening is not what is happening. You are being told that the corporation that eliminated your pension cares about your long-term well-being. You are being told that the company selling you a product designed to break in 2 years is a partner in sustainability. In the language of corporate social responsibility, when deployed without corresponding action, is not neutral marketing. It is a reality distortion layer placed between workers and consumers and the conditions they are actually living in. And the consequence is familiar in people who experience the gap between the stated values and the lived conditions begin to doubt their own perception. And they think, am I being too cynical? They think, maybe the company is trying, and I'm being unfair. In self-doubt.
That second guessing of one's own accurate perception is the signature of successful gaslighting.
Amazon's treatment of warehouse workers is a case study in this. The company has published extensive materials about its commitment to worker safety and satisfaction. It has spent significant money on the public documentation of that commitment. Meanwhile, injury rates at Amazon fulfillment centers have been reported by the Strategic Organizing Center, a coalition of labor unions, and to be consistently and significantly higher than the industry average. Workers describe quota systems that effectively penalize bathroom breaks. And the question is not whether Amazon is the most evil company in America. The question is what it costs a person psychologically and to work inside an institution whose official self-description does not match their daily experience, and to have no framework for understanding that gap. It costs them trust in their own perceptive, and that is expensive. And there is a line from Hannah Arendt, the political philosopher, written in 1951 in The Origins of Totalitarianism. And she wrote that the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, and people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction and the distinction between true and false no longer exist, and was writing about the architecture of mid-century authoritarianism. In 12, the sentence reads like a description of what algorithmic social media has produced in the 2020s Eli Pariser, internet activist who coined the phrase filter bubble in 2011. Described a mechanism that was then still theoretical for most users. The same query entered into Google by two different people with different browsing histories would return meaningfully different results. The platform was customizing reality to match the user's prior preferences rather than serving a common informational pool. And that was 2011. What has been built since then is incomparably more sophisticated. To the specific effect relevant here is the collapse of shared factual baseline. And two people cannot agree, not just on what things mean, but on what things happened. Conversation becomes impossible. And persuasion becomes impossible. Community becomes nearly impossible. And when community becomes impossible, isolation becomes the default condition of modern life. And this is the deepest structural consequence of the gaslighting environment. Not that people believe false things, and that people stop believing any shared framework is possible. They retreat to their own information ecosystems, which confirm their priors, makes them more extreme, which makes compromise with the other side more psychologically unimaginable. An personal gaslighting victim at an advanced stage has been severed from every relationship that might offer an independent reality check. They are alone with the gaslighter's version of events. This is what has happened structurally into large segments of the American public, not through one villain's deliberate plan, but through the intersection of profit incentives in political opportunism and human cognitive architecture. And one of the most important things to understand about gaslighting is that intelligence does not protect against it. In certain ways, intelligence makes the target more vulnerable. Intelligent person is accustomed to being able to reason their way through problems. They trust their analytical faculties. They trust their analytical faculties. When they encounter a gaslighting situation, they do what they always do. They try to analyze it. But gaslighting is not a problem that analysis can solve because the manipulator controls the information the target is using to analyze. You cannot find your way out of a maze if someone is moving the walls while you walk. Indus psychologist Jennifer Freyd at the University of Oregon developed what she called betrayal trauma theory. Her research, focused originally on childhood abuse, found that when the source of trauma is also the source of survival, the target's mind will suppress recognition of the betrayal to preserve the relationship that it needs. Children cannot afford to consciously recognize that a parent is dangerous because they depend on that parent. And so the mind edits the perception. Now apply that same logic to a broader population. If people depend on their government for physical security, in their employer for economic survival, on their media institutions for information, and on their social platforms for community. And all of these institutions are simultaneously participating in reality distortion. And then the psychological cost of fully recognizing what is happening is enormous. The mind protects itself from what I cannot afford to see. This is not weakness. This is the mind doing its job. But it means that the path out of the gaslighting environment is not more information. It is not reading more. It is not getting smarter. People are already smart. The path out requires something more like courage than intelligence. It requires the willingness to tolerate a period of sustained uncertainty. In between, I can see that something is wrong, and I know exactly what to do about it. And without collapsing back into the comfort of a false explanation, here is what does not work. Rage is satisfying. Rage feels like action. But rage directed at a gaslighting environment is fuel for that environment because the outrage economy feeds on exactly that energy. Every furious share, every alarmed click, every enraged comment is data confirming to the algorithm that the manipulation is working. Enrage keeps the user on platform. The platform profits. The cycle continues. Here is what does work. And the first thing is radical commitment to primary sources, not news stories about events. In the actual events where accessible, not a commentator's analysis of what a politician said. In the transcript of what the politician said, this is slower. It is less emotionally stimulating. It is dramatically more reliable. And the psychologist Maria Konnikova, in her book The Confidence Game, analyzed how con artists cultivate their targets. And the consistent finding was that con artists are effective not because their targets are uneducated, but because they exploit the shortcuts that all human cognition uses. A person who says, I already know what this source is going to say, is not being analytical. They are using a heuristic, and heuristics can be hacked. Radical commitment to primary sources is the discipline of refusing the intermediary that has been compromised. And the second thing is the envelopment of what the philosopher Charles Peirce called genuine doubt and not cynicism. Cynicism is actually a form of intellectual closure, a premature resolution of uncertainty. Genuine doubt is the willingness to remain uncertain until evidence resolves the question, and the discipline to resist the seduction of false resolution. In practice, this looks like pausing before sharing. It looks like asking, what do I actually know and what was I told? It looks like treating high emotional activation as a signal to slow down rather than a signal to act. In the third thing, and this may be the most difficult in the current environment, is the reconstruction of local, specific, direct community, and not online community, not parasocial community with media figures whose voices feel familiar. Actual people in actual rooms whose lives you can verify directly. The gaslighting environment is most effective in isolation. It requires the target to have no independent reality checks. The antidote is not a better news source. It is a neighbor whose water bill you can compare to your own. It is a colleague who works in the same building and has seen the same policy change without explanation. It is a local institution, a library, a union hall, a community meeting, where shared perception can be rebuilt at human scale. And this is not a romantic notion. It is a structural one. And local community is the only information environment that is actually difficult to architect from above, because it is granular, it is embodied, and it is corroborated by direct experience. The fourth thing is what might be called perceptual discipline. And this is the practice of distinguishing between I feel that this is true and I have evidence that this is true. It is the practice of sitting with the discomfort of not knowing rather than immediately filling the space with an available narrative. In neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett, in her work on the construction of emotion, describes how the brain is fundamentally a prediction machine. It is constantly generating expectations and updating them when reality deviates. In gaslighting exploits is the brain's preference for coherent narrative over accurate perception. And when reality is incoherent, the brain will accept a coherent lie over an accurate mess. And called displensual discipline is the conscious practice of slowing that automatic process. I'm asking, is this explanation coherent because it is true, or because it was designed to feel coherent? These are not easy practices, and they require sustained effort inside an environment that profits from exactly the opposite, but they are learnable, and they compound over time. 9.2. Person who has spent 2 years practicing genuine doubt in a manipulation-saturated environment becomes significantly harder to gaslight. And the person who has spent 2 years getting better at being outraged. And one of the most disorienting features of living inside a gaslighting environment is that history keeps getting edited. And the Soviet state was famous for this. Photographs were altered. Encyclopedias were reissued with deleted entries. Officials who fell from power were literally removed from the record. And George Orwell wrote 1984 from that observation, and the Ministry of Truth, in the government department responsible for rewriting history to match current policy, was not satire. It was extrapolation. In America, the editing is less centralized and more chaotic, which in some ways makes it harder to track. It is not that a single authority is rewriting the record. It is that the record is being contested simultaneously from many directions, and the chaos of that contestation is itself the point. If everyone has a different version of what happened, then the fact that a thing happened becomes effectively unresolvable. The historian Timothy Snyder, in his book On Tyranny, wrote that the precondition for authoritarianism is not that citizens believe the propaganda. It is that citizens stop believing that truth is findable. And once a population accepts that all accounts are equally suspect, it has lost the tool it needs to hold power accountable. And power that cannot be held accountable by its citizens does not remain accountable by choice. This is the long game, and awareness of the long game changes how someone moves through the present moment. It means that choosing to verify rather than forward is not a small thing. It is a political act. It means that insisting on accuracy in conversation, even when it is socially costly, is a form of civic maintenance. It means that building and sustaining local institutions and relationships that generate shared reality at human scale is not nostalgia. It is architecture. It is building the structure that makes shared public life possible. There is a scene near the end of the 1944 film that gave us this word. And the wife, Paula, has spent months in a state of creeping dissolution. And she has been told repeatedly that she is forgetful, unstable, imagining things. And she has been progressively stripped of every relationship and every piece of evidence that might confirm what she actually perceives. She is, by the film's midpoint, a person who does not trust herself, and then a detective, a man with no stake in her confusion, looks at the evidence she has been unable to trust and tells her, "You are not imagining it." In 4 words, that is all it takes to begin the reversal. Not a long explanation, not a formal investigation, and thus the confirmation of an independent witness. You are not imagining it. And the power of that scene is not that an external authority rescues her. It is that she already knew. She and always known, the gaslighting did not create a false belief. It created a suppression of a true one. Every person reading this who has felt that particular kind of disorientation, who has sat in front of the news and thought, "Am I the only one who remembers this differently? Am I the only one who notices that this does not add up, is not imagining it?" And confusion is not a personal failing. It is the expected output of an environment that has been, to varying degrees and through various mechanisms, engineered to produce confusion. And that does not mean every perception is accurate. It does not mean cynicism is the cure. It does not mean retreating from public life into private certainty. It means the work is worth doing. In the work of staying calibrated, the work of maintaining genuine relationships, in the work of insisting quietly and persistently that what you observed yesterday is what you observed yesterday. It means understanding that clarity, not certainty, but clarity, is available to the person willing to do that work. And that a person who has recovered their own perceptual ground is not just better off personally, they are harder to move. In a manipulation environment, a person who cannot be easily manipulated is not an isolated island of sanity. They are an anchor point. And they are someone others can check their own perceptions against. They are a small-scale version of the detective in that film. And the world has a use for those people right now. It has always had a use for them. The question is whether you choose to be one. If something in this video named a thing you have been feeling but could not quite articulate, drop it in the comments. And specifically, which part of this hit closest to home for you? Media environment, the political strategy, the corporate language, or the social isolation. Different people feel these different layers indifferently, and hearing where others are at changes the conversation. If this is the kind of content worth keeping in your feed, a like and a subscription go a long way on this platform. And share it with one person who you think is asking the same questions. See you in the next one.